Earlier this year I had the opportunity to talk to Icelandic actor Darri Olafsson, whom I've been a fan of since I first saw him in Trapped in 2016. I know this sounds dumb, but I've been wondering what to do with the interview ever since. It would seem to fit my second channel perfectly, because that channel is literally called the Reykjavik Review, and I started it mainly because I wanted to talk about Trapped, the first season of which is my favourite season of any TV show ever, and Darri plays the lead role in that series. The problem with putting the whole interview on that channel is that it felt like a bit of a wasted opportunity because very few people watch it, and Darri had so generously given me more than an hour of his time. So in this video, I've cut it back to just the parts where we focus more on language, but we do move between topics quite a lot, so I'll also put the entire interview on the Reykjavik Review. If you're interested in Darri's work, there'll be a list of my favourites in the description, but I also want to mention that Darri recently won an award for an audiobook he narrated. Of course, most Icelanders wouldn't consider English a foreign language, but if that's not proficiency in a second language, then nothing is. Enjoy the chat. I'm the sort of person I could be in Sydney and Tom Cruise would be filming the latest Mission Impossible and come and ask me for the time, and I'd be like, it's 4:30. And that would just be a story for me. I'd be, yeah, Tom Cruise asked me for the time, but you put me in front of Sophia Helene or Alia Topheim or anyone who's been in any of the Nordic stuff, and I will become a bit starstruck.
To me, honestly, it's surprising how often people recognize me from Trapped.
Trapped kind of seemed to break out in a way that I don't know, I have this warped perception of how things are because I'm so used to meeting Australian people or just my Australian friends. I am telling them about this series, and some of them are so unfamiliar with the idea of something that's not in English that they have to actually clarify. They're like, wait, it's in Icelandic? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's in Icelandic, but that's just like people in Iceland speak Icelandic, so it's got to be in Iceland. And they're like, so how do you, what happens there? And I'm like, well, it has subtitles. Are you not familiar with subtitles? And they're like, oh, okay. And yeah, I had about 10 people around to my house on a public holiday in the middle of winter, and we watched the whole series in one day. And for about 4 of the people there, it was like pretty much their first time with subtitles. So that's the kind of, the kind of position that I'm used to coming up against. And I just imagine that it would be a step harder again.
Yeah.
To be the person in that, to go, yeah, like we make stuff in Iceland. It's actually a thing that happens.
No, I think I absolutely know where you're coming from. And I remember, it was one of my Icelandic friends was directing a show at the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford. And I remember one evening, I think we were done with rehearsals and we were going to go have a beer or something at rehearsals. And this actress says, well, I have to be home at 9. And this is like 10 years ago or something. And I'm like, you have to be home at 9. Okay. Why? She's like, oh, there's a Danish TV show on called The Killing.
The Killing, of course. Yeah.
And that was a really eye-opener for me because, we had watched in Iceland, we're much more used to, we watch everything with subtitles. So we don't dub anything. And so I'm watching a movie now in English, and I'll have subtitles because I'm just used to it.
Wait, with English subtitles? Or?
Yes. Yeah. I'll just have the English subtitles on.
Yeah.
But that was I remember that for me, that was, we had watched in Iceland, had The Killing going on like 2 or 3 years before.
Yeah.
And that's an extraordinary series. And I totally understood why she was so wrapped up in it. And this is before, Netflix and these streamers. So she had to be at home and watching linear TV.
Yeah.
And then I realized, well, okay, so maybe there's a breakout in this, because this is what used to be the problem in the English speaking world. So generally would be that people would be like, so it has subtitles. And then that would mean like, I'm not going to watch that.
Yeah, I'm not going to watch that.
But then series, and I think especially, at least for us in Scandinavia, we owe a lot to Danish TV because the Danes made and are still making extraordinarily good TV. And in recent years, there's a lot of good TV coming out of Finland and Sweden and Norway. But the Danes have just consistently done excellent TV with The Killing and Borgen and The Bridge. Follow the Money is a great example. There's a great series from Norway called Exit.
Okay, I don't know that.
It's fascinating about psychopaths in the financial industry. It's really over the top, but incredibly enjoyable. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but I think you're right. I think, you know, it's taken a while for people to open their eyes to watching films in another language. But I've heard stories that Netflix, and I think someone told me that Netflix aims to do like 70% of their material in another language than English in a few years. So I think, you know, and for someone like coming from Iceland, you could not believe the value of a big company like Netflix being interested in creating content for, you know, there's maybe 400,000 people that speak Icelandic in the world. That's incredibly low, and that you get the opportunity to make material in your own language. I honestly think that, you know, this stuff could save languages all around the world from just dying out. So it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, this is kind of related to what you were just saying, but somewhat off the topic of films and TV. I spoke to a Canadian guy who's kind of made it his obsession in the last 6 to 7 years to learn Icelandic to a very high level.
Okay.
And I've heard differing reports about this, but he says that Iceland is having a bit of a problem at the moment with the youth who don't want to speak Icelandic and would prefer to speak English. How much of this is exaggerated?
Well, I think he's right in a way. It's no secret. As you get older, you tend to get a little bit more sort of conservative when it comes to certain matters. But, you know, people have complained about English influence into the language for a long time. Before that, people complained about Danish influence, because Iceland was under Danish rule for hundreds of years, and it was considered like quite sort of fancy to be able to use Danish words in high society. And now it's considered not fancy to use English words. My personal opinion is that, I think it's important to make sure that the Icelandic is there, but I also think it's incredibly important in the spoken language that we also allow for, evolution, because all languages evolve. I think I don't speak today in the same way I spoke when I was 16 or 18. And so I feel we shouldn't be too strict on that. You know, it's our job to make sure that the Icelandic language survives. And I think it's most important that people can write in that language. You know, like in French, French is notoriously difficult grammar-wise. It's really hard to write, whereas people can speak it easily. And I think it's a good heads up, and I find it. I'm really happy that someone who's working so hard and studying Icelandic is actually open to and realizing that problem. I think that's fantastic.
Well, I think there's sort of two separate questions. There's the idea of English coming into Icelandic, which I think is more or less inevitable. I've seen a lot. I can only comment on Swedish because it's the only other language I speak. But there's a fair bit in Swedish. Not so much that it's like degraded or anything. But I think he's suggesting that some teens are so kind of keen on American culture that they'll almost disown all Icelandic things, and just by the time they can speak fluently in English, they will just speak English. I think that's what he was kind of suggesting. Not that they'll speak Icelandic with English in it.
I mean, maybe that's the case, but I have never met any Icelandic teen that would do that.
Okay.
And it's also a question of choice. I mean, we in Iceland, we learn quite a bit of languages. We study English as that's one of the languages we have to learn, and one Scandinavian language. And then most of us.
It doesn't have to be Danish.
It can be Norwegian or Swedish. And then, like for me, I was in doing languages at school. So I studied French and German and Latin and Spanish. But I wouldn't say I spoke them, but, I can understand much more than I can speak, and at least have sort of the basic knowledge behind it. But I think it's also incredibly important in a small country that's in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the Atlantic, that we are open to languages and cultures. And like I said, it's a double-edged sword. By not dubbing everything, you hear English and you hear the languages being spoken. But as in Germany and France and in Spain, where they dub everything in their own language, you miss that.
Because you must speak a bit of Danish, because you spoke some Danish in the first season of Trapped.
I do speak a little bit, and I have, for some bizarre reason, played a Dane more than once, and spoken in Danish more than once. So I studied it for years, but I should just spend some time in Denmark. If I were to spend 4 or 5 months there, I would speak Danish like in a heartbeat. And it has to be said that all the Scandinavian languages are quite related. Icelandic and Finnish, of course, they're different. And Icelandic is much harder. Let's put it this way: it would be harder for someone from Sweden to pick up Icelandic rather than pick up Norwegian or Danish.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's also because Icelandic is just different in the mouth. It's much harder and much more sort of, I don't know if defined is the right word, but articulated, probably. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. I maybe what I'm saying is just I think there's certain sort of fashion in language, and I understand that, but it would be nice if there was more interest in learning languages, but I also at the same time I think that's what's going to happen. We all have to learn more languages.
Is that something that you guys feel within Scandinavia? Like, is there a kind of a brotherhood with Sweden and Norway and Denmark, or is it just like, I'm doing this in Iceland, and if someone asked me to come to Denmark to film something, then I will?
Well, I could ask you, like New Zealand and Australia, they're two different countries. But they're sort of defined by the fact that these countries kind of far away from other countries. And, it's really funny. Anytime you guys speak about a short flight, it can be a 6-hour flight and you're like, oh, it's nothing. It's really funny. Everywhere else, everyone's like, oh my God, it's 6 hours. But I think Scandinavia is a little bit like that. So we feel that we call ourselves brothers, and there's a lot of cooperation that goes along, between Scandinavian countries. And I think the Nordic noir is a sort of general phrase about living in a very northern part of the world, which means, you get a lot of sunlight in summer and a lot of darkness in winter, and the sort of a certain melancholy that comes from that, a certain kind of depression that comes from that, and you know, it's funny, like here, my time here in South Australia, South Australia reminds me of Iceland in so many ways, which is bizarre, but I'm in the outback and I'm like, oh, that could be at home. You know, it's only the heat that's different, but the landscape and the people in many ways are incredibly warm. And just, you know, I feel good. I just like it here. And I think that's the kind of feeling I get when I leave Iceland for another Scandinavian country.
Okay, yeah.
You know, I can meet any Finnish person anywhere and get along with them because Finns are incredible. And I can say the same for my, you know, Norwegian or Swedish or Danish brothers. And, you know, and it doesn't stop there. Ireland is a place I really feel at home, in Scotland as well. So I don't know, it's interesting, but I think it's because there's been this mixing of cultures for such a long time now there, that you sort of, you know, it's home in many ways. And, you know, sometimes people in the States go like, oh yeah, we know nothing about the surrounding world. And then I was like, well, it's easy for me to say. I live in Iceland, which is, you know, it takes you 16 hours to drive around the country. Whereas, you know, you can be here in Australia and it take me 16 hours to drive into the middle of the country. And you know, so, and the same in the US, you know, you've been driving from one part of it to the next, it's going to take you 3-4 days. And of course, when you live in such a big place, maybe you don't really care who is prime minister of Israel or Albania, you know. Whereas, you know, in a small place like Iceland, you might be able to find that out through the news.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I think it was around 2004 or 5. I was lucky enough to work with Stellan Skarsgård, the Swedish actor, and I just had so many great conversations with him. He had been at that point and was really successful. Had done Ronin and other good films. And has continued to have a great career. I know that he lived, and I think he still lives in Stockholm, and would work there and would work in the US and work anywhere. And Mads Mikkelsen also has done continued to do a lot of stuff back home. For me personally, I just, it's a privilege to be able to act in your own language. There is so much stuff. It's so much harder to act in another language. There's you're using sort of different muscles in the brain.
I'm really interested to hear you say that, because sometimes we get this idea that Scandinavians particularly speak English to such a high level that it's no harder for them, or no, like sometimes even some people would suggest easier. And I've never really heard a Scandinavian say that, unless they're trying to talk themselves up. But I'm really interested to hear you say that, because I remember your accent in what was it, Quarry, and it's perfect as far as I can hear. I'm not American, of course, but so it's like, I know you can do it, but you're saying it's still you still, if you can, prefer to act in Icelandic, or you feel it's different.
Well, I at least feel it's a privilege to be able to do that. So, and like we talked about before, I think the quality of filmmaking, the quality of the work in Iceland, it's just really high. So anytime you get a good part like Trapped or The Minister, it's really tempting to go back home and do that. You know, I won't lie. Of course, in a language that only 400,000 people speak, you know, there is less money than you would have when you're doing something in the US or abroad. And so I'm not going to belittle that. That's something we all need in life. Some money, and I just feel incredibly lucky that I've been able to go back and forth and work back home every once in a while, but then also go out and work.
So again, if you want to see the whole chat, including all the film and TV related discussion, that's on my second channel, which is linked in the description. I want to thank Darri for doing this, and thank you for watching.